I was in hospital receiving treatment for a medical condition that I have, and no one had anticipated that my body would go into toxic shock because of all the medication that I was being given, and it wasn't properly supervised. So one evening, essentially my body died, and I was given a vision in another realm. So I was totally aware that my physical body was unconscious in the hospital bed. But then I was like awake and aware in this other space that I could observe what was happening in the room. But I was also in this middle space where I could also see this golden light, like a grid coming out of my body, and this white light or torus field coming into the room, and it was drawing this golden energy out of my body and taking it. And that's when I became aware, oh wait, hang on a minute, am I dying here? Because it was never expected. And I sort of stopped. I said, hey, wait, I haven't said goodbye yet. So I was able to, an aspect of my awareness was able to leave that hospital room and go and visit my father and my mother, who were interstate at the time. And I went and found my brother, I went and found my sister, I went and found my 2 children and said goodbye to them in, another realm. And then my awareness came back into the hospital room, and I said, okay, I'm ready now. And I was ready to surrender, basically. And that's when this other voice rose up and out of my body and said, not so fast, And so all of that whole experience there really shifted my perspective in terms of, well, number one, I survived. Number 2, why did I survive, and why was I given those visions and that awareness of this golden grid and light coming out of the body? And what was that other voice that came out of my body? What was all that about? So, life certainly hasn't been the same since I've come home from there. And I think when you go through a near-death experience, you can't go back to not knowing what you now know or have witnessed or have experienced. So, I'm definitely paying more attention to what my body is saying. I'm not ignoring my body anymore. Yeah.
Was that something that you used to do?
Ignore my body?
Yeah.
All the time. All the time. And one of the things that the voice said to me was, you've used me, you've abused me, you've exhausted me, you've burnt me out, you've totally ignored my needs. It's me that's going to decide, not you. When I decide that you will die, then we tap out. And I was like, who's that voice coming out? And it was my body basically giving me a lecture about the way that I have been mistreating myself. And I had not appreciated fully what this physical body really is. But once I saw that golden light coming out, I thought, wow, hang on a minute. That's our life force energy. That's the soul. And Creator God, whatever you believe in, gives you this physical body to house this energy, life force energy. And if you don't take care of the physical body, then you lose the gift of life. I didn't fully appreciate the significance of that until I had that experience.
That is so profound, and I think very often, right, we go through life thinking what our bodies can do for us and how can we use our bodies, instead of thinking what do they need and how can we keep them in best shape, condition, health.
Well, you know what? I think we know the theory. I think we know that we should look after ourselves. We shouldn't drink alcohol so much. We shouldn't eat junk food. But But in all honesty, Sabrina, we don't care. You know, we get lazy, you know, we seek comfort, we want to just appease our cravings, and we don't think about two things. One, the long-term consequence of our short-term decisions, and two, we don't really appreciate what this physical body actually is. You know, like I grew up as a Roman Catholic, and I used to hear words in the Mass that talked about the house of God. And I used to go, yeah, I thought it was a church somewhere, you know. But then I realised, actually, hang on a minute. If we are all seeds of Creator, we are all walking miracles, yeah? That seed of life is that golden thing that I saw. And every one of us has this life force energy. What we were not told was, in order for us to maximize this experience here on earth, we actually have to look after the house of the seed, the house of God, which is our body. And when you start to relate to your body like that, it's like, I wouldn't dare disrespect my God. No way. You know, he loved me so much that he gave me this life. Why would I do that? That's so disrespectful to me as his son or daughter, but also to Creator. Like, wow, no. So now I'm very much more considerate. You know, I really think about, is this choice respecting my well-being and good health? You know, is this how I keep my house clean? You know, or am I abusing it and I'm not caring about this house? You know, because what you get out of it is what you put in. You know, and I realise with my history, so I've had cancer a couple of times, and I don't want to admit that I contributed to having cancer. Like, I don't think anyone wants to say, yes, I created the cancer. But in some way, we have contributed to cancer forming in our bodies. We know, science will tell you that, you know, 50% of the diseases that we experience comes from lifestyle, which we have direct management and control and choice over. You know, how you think, how you feed yourself, what actions you take, what you do and don't do to look after the body. They're all active choices that we can make every single day. And it's not about looking in the mirror and getting really angry at yourself and saying, you've done a really bad job, how dare you, that's horrible, you're a horrible person. It's about deciding today, now that I realise what this is, now that I realise how important this physical body is, I'm deciding today to take better care of it. So what can I do right now, one thing that would demonstrate that care or that respect or that love for this body? You know, and some people say, you know, you really have to love yourself. Well, if you've had a lifetime of hating yourself, it's very difficult to go from hate to love. It can be, but it doesn't have to be that difficult. So instead of going from despising yourself or your body or your relationship with you, how about taking the first step? And the first step is liking. Just deciding for one day, right here, right now, I'm going to like myself. And if I actually liked myself, how would I speak to myself? What kind of thoughts would I choose if I actually liked myself? What sort of narrative would I have if I actually liked myself? If you actually think about people that you like, how do you treat them? And is that how you're treating yourself? And now if there's a gap in there, we need to do something about that. Right? So like I said, whatever's happened in the past, it's the past. You can't change it, you can't go back, you can't get rid of it. But right now, right here, you get to determine your future. Your past is not an accurate prediction of your future unless you're living there, right? We are conscious creators of our reality. What that means is we get to choose how we think. We get to choose what comes out of our mouth, right? We get to choose what we do. And we can start today. It's never too late and you're never too old.
I absolutely love this. That's such a good frame. And indeed, as you say, start where you're at and start today and start with the tiniest thing. Because we often think we need to make massive changes in our lives. And we never start by doing massive changes because your life can just not change overnight. If, for instance, if you're overweight, you can start by just taking a walk around a block, whatever feels manageable to you. You cannot start by running a marathon.
No,
for
exactly.
sure not. So you're just setting yourself up for failure. If that's your goal, if you say, well, I'm going to get fit, today I'm going out and running 10 kilometers, well, that's just not feasible. And then you're going to think, I'm such a failure, I'm horrendous, I cannot possibly do this, and those thoughts will reinforce the damaging behavior that brought you to the place.
And you might want to check whether there's a pattern of that. Do you have a pattern of self-sabotage where you say you want something and you set yourself an unrealistic goal or expectation, and of course you're going to fail. So then that just feeds itself. So you could actually have a pattern in there that sets yourself up to fail. And if that's the case, what you have to realize is that a pattern is not you. It's a pattern. And if you can observe it, you can change it. If you can become aware that there's this pattern that you do that's not working, if you can actually see that, straight away you can see that you're not the pattern. You're the observer of the pattern. And then it's like, wow, okay. If you try to figure out why do I have that pattern, where did that start, you don't want to waste your time doing that. Because if you do that, you're just feeding it. So if you want to change a pattern, the only way that's successful, and I know this from doing my master's studies in neuroscience, is to decide what the new pattern is that you want. So do not focus on, I want to stop this. You have to focus on what you want to start. And the reason for that is when you focus on what you want to stop, if I say, I want to stop eating chocolate. I want to stop eating chocolate. I don't want to eat chocolate. I don't want to eat chocolate. I don't want to eat. What am I focusing on? The chocolate, right? I'm focusing on the very thing I don't want. So instead of focusing on what you don't want, what you have to do is focus on what you do want. Just that reframe empowers you and gets a different part of your brain online, which assists and supports you to make healthier decisions. And if you notice, think about something you don't want to do anymore, right? Think about it. Notice how it feels when you think about that. And then say to yourself, okay, if that's what I don't want, what is it that I do want? So now say to yourself, this is what I want. I want. And notice how that thought feels. It feels much more uplifting and much more expansive, right? When you focus on what you don't want, it's actually quite contracting. It's very narrow. It doesn't give you options to fix it. You just focus on the problem, yeah? And so this is why when you're trying to change a pattern, stop focusing on what you're trying to stop. Start focusing on what you want to start, right? And then get into practice. And every time you do that new practice, you congratulate yourself. You say, well done, I did it. And notice how it feels good to start to see yourself getting things right. Yeah? Just one little thing every day. And every day make sure you pay attention when you do it and give yourself a pat on the back, because that's positive reinforcement and that's a signal to the brain to do more of that. That's how you change a habit.
I love that. And I think very often, right, in our lives, we're just stuck into what we don't want and into what we don't need. So if we're not happy in our relationship, we'll think, well, I don't want this partner, or I don't want them to do this. But rarely do we think, well, what does the right partner look like for us? What do they do instead of what they don't do?
And the thing I would say about that is, when you focus on what you don't want, those thoughts are perfectly normal, natural, and human. They're not bad, right? But you don't want to live there. You don't want to live focusing on what you don't want, because where focus goes, energy flows, yeah? So if you're focusing on what you don't want, you're creating, attracting, and manifesting more of what you don't want, right? However, you need to know what you don't want, right? You need to know what you don't want, because that's what's going to keep you safe, right? But you don't want to live there. You want to acknowledge it and say, okay, thank you, brain, for reminding me for the 100th time today what I don't want. And then you literally have to do the refocus forward. If that's what I don't want, what is it that I do want? And straight away, you let go of what you were focusing on before, which is what you don't want. And now you're starting to look forward to towards what you do want. Because every time you say you want something, you're always looking forward. That's what you want, right? And then once you decide what I want is a partner that's going to respect me, okay. So then you say, okay, so what one thing can I do right now that takes me in that general direction? And maybe the little voice will say, well, start respecting yourself, right? Because people will treat you according to your own standards. If you don't have boundaries, there's no standards, yeah? If you're the one that teaches people how to treat you. If you don't like how someone's treating you, you've got to stop and go, how am I contributing to this? How am I somehow saying without saying that this is okay? When I make excuses for their behaviour, when I say it's all right, when actually it's not, right? And so what that means is you feel disrespected by someone else because you're already doing it yourself. So sometimes it's a wake-up call to start to enlist and exercise some healthy boundaries around how do you want to be treated? Start treating yourself that way, right? Because then you'll start attracting more of what and who you are.
Exactly. And I think your respect for yourself will also increase the more you are on this path of respecting yourself more, or paying more attention to your own needs and meeting them as well. Because very often we think of other people meeting our needs, but we don't really think of ourselves meeting our own needs.
You know, it's kind of like walking around. If you expect someone to complete you or to fulfill you, it's like you're walking around with an empty cup and you're basically saying, I'm not enough. I need someone to make me feel like I'm enough. And that's a very needy person. And people don't like needy people, right? So what we need to do is we need to fill our own cup. So if you go out with a full cup, all of a sudden it's a different story, right? You're partnering or engaging with other people saying, I'm actually good, I'm actually enough, and I like who I am. And if someone's behaviour doesn't correspond with that energy that I'm feeling, then I know they're not the right person for me, right? I don't need another person. I'd like another person to complement me, not to complete me, and not to compete with me. Yeah?
That is the right frame. So I was thinking, when you talked about having had multiple near-death experiences, and it sounds like this last one that we talked about, you already knew what a near-death experience was, right? Because you did that before. But I was wondering, how did having these near-death experiences shape who you are today?
Well, the first ones I had was 2 days in a row back in 1991 when I was diagnosed with cancer and given 6 months to live. And I lost a lot of blood and I was in intensive care and I was unconscious. And during those 2 weeks, I flatlined twice and, had an out-of-body experience. And for the first, I had never heard of a near-death experience. I was 24 years old. No one ever talked about it. We didn't have the internet. And there wasn't a whole lot of books about it at the time, let alone there wasn't even a lot of books about cancer either, actually. And so, this was a whole, massive awakening for me. I thought maybe it was the drugs, I tried to rationalize it because I'd never heard of it before. And then I met a man in Victoria who did a lot of work around conquering cancer. And I went to one of his conferences and I was also exposed to Hay House and Louise Hay. And through those, I started hearing about this thing called near-death experiences. So then I started reading, I started buying books and reading a little bit about it. And I went, I had one of those. Okay, so when you have a near-death experience, you might see something, you might hear something, you might sense something, but you are being awakened or initiated into a new frame of awareness, yeah? And once you see something, you can't unsee it, right? Once you know something, you can't pretend you don't know it. So for me, my life was completely different because I heard the voice of, I realise now, after many, many years, it was Archangel Gabriel telling me it wasn't my time the first 2 times. And I had that out-of-body experience where I saw my body in the bed and I was floating on the ceiling, looking at that, going, hang on, how can I be there and here at the same time? And that's when I realised there's more to this consciousness and life than I realised before. And so that's when I started asking a lot of questions because I wanted to find the answers, and things that I had believed from school or the church or people, adults that I respected, were not making sense to me now because I had had this experience that no one could explain. So this set me off on becoming a seeker, becoming a seeker of truth. But this time it must be my truth, not just the truth that everybody else told me was the truth, yeah? And so that really set me off on a path to, I guess, remember who I really am and what this life is really all about.
I love that. And especially when you talked about, having this new frame of awareness, and you ended on saying who you really are and what life is really about. And I want to dig a bit deeper into that because I try to uncover what are the things and the values that we come back with after a near-death experience that somebody who has never heard of one or hasn't had the experience doesn't know. So what is that understanding of life and of our purpose that we get from it?
Well, I think it's different. I think it's same and different. I think everybody's near-death experience is not going to be exactly the same. Obviously, it's like dreams. We all have dreams, but they're never the same as everybody else's dreams. And we've got to remember that we were all birthed with a unique soul contract. So we were all birthed with an agreement of this thing, of the experience that we were going to have in this lifetime. And that's all part of our soul's growth and evolution. So for me, what it's done is it's made me realise that there is a lot more to life than this 3-dimensional reality that we know, that we all know because we're living here in 3D. I think it's also made me aware that we have access to an enormous army of helpers if we would only tune into them and ask for help. They're there, and they're always there, and we all have them, and they're just waiting for us to reach out and ask for help. But there's a way to ask for help, and there's a way not to do it. If you're coming from desperation and you're telling them it has to be like this, like this, like this, like this, that's not how it works. So when you make a wish or when you pray for a particular outcome, you need to pray from a place of love, not from a place of fear, right? And straight away, I know you know what I'm talking about, right? When you think about the energy of fear, notice how desperate you feel. Whereas when you speak from a place of love, there's this quiet calm and a knowing that the right thing will happen at the right time. We're not in control of when something happens, if it's going to happen. But what we can do is put out a call to say, look, and this is very real for me. I have a family member who's not well. I pray for their health and well-being. And I always say, for the highest and divine good of all. Because I don't know if that's meant to happen or not. So I let go, I make the wish, and I ask with a loving heart. And then it's up to the benevolent force of God to determine when and if that happens. And to understand that what happens, sometimes it looks horrible on the outside, but underneath there's a deeper lesson that we need to integrate as part of our awakening consciousness.
That's very true. And I think a lot of what we've talked about so far also touches upon mindset and the importance of our mindset and the mindset that we go into challenges, into situations with. And as a cancer survivor, I can only imagine mindset is most times the lowest it's ever been when you're going through those motions. And especially you talked about having been told you would have 6 months to live. So I cannot even begin to imagine what this does to a person. But it does seem to me that you found resilience and strength and the ability to keep your mind at least focused on the goal and on getting through it. So would you talk, I'm sorry, could you talk a bit more about your mindset going through cancer treatment and recovery?
So I think the biggest secret, which is not really a secret, and it's something that I've already shared here, is focusing your attention on the right fight. Okay? So what I did, and I didn't realize it at the time, was I focused on what I wanted, not what I didn't want. So it's very easy to say, I don't want to die. Of course you don't want to die. Most people don't want to die. But some people actually, and this happened to me a few years ago, I had a very good friend who was diagnosed with cancer, and he was in his 60s. And I went and visited him in the hospital, and he was absolutely exhausted, and he was putting up a very brave fight. And I looked at him and I said, "You're exhausted, aren't you?" And he said, "I am so exhausted." And I looked at him and I said, "You don't have to keep fighting if you don't want to." And he burst into tears and he said, "I am tired. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. Maybe this is the way I'm meant to go." And I said, "Well, go, let go." And he didn't realize that he could make that choice. It was his life, his body. He didn't have children. His extended family were sort of, pushing him to fight. But he really didn't want to. He'd had a really tough life and he'd had enough. And so I sat with him that night and I held his hand and we prayed, and he had so much profound peace by the time I left him. And he thanked me for giving him permission to just tell the truth about what he wanted. And 2 days later, he passed away in deep peace. So peaceful, So for me, I was very, very aware of the two fights that I could choose from. I could fight against the cancer, which really is fighting against myself, because the cancer is actually part of this body at that time. So I could say I don't want to die, and notice how that makes you feel, more anxious, more desperate. It doesn't help you, and it creates more stress, which then creates more cortisol in the system, which will make you even more sick, right? Or you focus your attention on what you want. So somehow intuitively I knew I had to choose to focus my attention on what I wanted, which was to live. And so I did. I could hear these thoughts about, you don't want to die, you don't want to die, you don't want to die. And I go, yeah, I know, but I didn't like how it made me feel to think about those thoughts. So I just every day deliberately focused my attention on wanting to live. And so that was simple. All I did was, okay, so if I want to live, what kind of thoughts do I need to have? If I want to live, what kind of food or drinks do I need to have? If I want to live, how do I need to look after my body? If I want to live, what sorts of decisions do I need to make? If I want to live, what sort of people should I be staying away from or being around? Like, you've got to take 100% responsibility for yourself. It's no one else's responsibility to make you well or to make you happy, right? If you put that power in someone else's hands, my goodness, what sovereignty have you got of your own life? You have to claim back your power. You have to claim back your will. And you have to claim 100% responsibility for your happiness and unhappiness. If you're unhappy or unwell, ask yourself, what do I need to do to make myself happy? What do I need to do to get well? We have so much more power between our ears and in here than we've been led to believe.
That's very true. I think very often in a lot of people that live the lives that they're not happy with, what I notice is this pattern of not taking responsibility and not being accountable. So it's constantly somebody else's fault that I'm in a job that I don't like. It's my manager's fault that I don't like my job. It's my partner's fault that I'm not happy in the relationship and that they're not making me happy. And somehow this awful life and challenges are just happening to me, and I have absolutely no control over that. And it's a very difficult place to do anything about, because you're essentially saying, well, all those people have the power, I have none. So how could I possibly change anything about that situation, right, if I have no power?
You've always got power, and you can always change the way you look at it. Right? The second you change the way you look at something, the very thing you look at changes. So really take that in. So I can say, my relationship's crap, he doesn't make me happy. But if you look at it and go, well, how am I making him happy? How am I making myself happy? It's not his job to make me happy. If I'm happy, I'm bringing a happy version of me into that relationship. Straight away it's going to change. Straight away I'm going to become more grateful, right? So it's being able to make sure that you're using your ability to assess and discern clearly, right? Because you could be throwing away something that's really, really good if you put in a bit more effort. That maybe it's not up to the other person to give you more. Maybe you've got to contribute more to change that dynamic, to turn it around, to communicate your needs. Are your needs being made explicitly, or are you expecting your partner to have a crystal ball to know what you feel, to know what you think, to know what you need? That doesn't work. You're setting your partner up to fail. Just let them know.
Yeah, and one thing that I would tell my 20-year-old self now is if you don't really like yourself and you don't respect yourself and you don't love yourself, it's very difficult to accept the fact that somebody else might. Because you don't see yourself as worthy of that love and respect. So it's just unbelievable to the point where you don't believe it, that anybody else would love you.
So here's the thing. You and everyone else listening to this podcast interview were born worthy. There's nothing to deserve it. You were born worthy. Now your behavior might not always match that. Then there are things that have happened in your life that have made you feel, well, maybe I deserve that hurt or that harm or that punishment because I'm not a good person. Who's making up that story? Because I can tell you now, if your creator was in the room when you said that, he would not be sitting there going, yeah, I agree with you. He'd be going, what on earth are you saying? What on earth are you thinking? Things like that happen to teach you something. Life doesn't happen to you. Because if you see life as happening to you, you will be the victim of everything that happens to you. But if you could turn it around and say, maybe it happened for me, even those really horrible things that happened in my life, how could that have happened for me? What can I learn from that? If I pick up the rock and look underneath, what's the gift in the shadow? You know, is it to have compassion? Is it to go and help people that have had abuse? You know, who does it make you become? Because you get to choose whether you become a bitter or better version of yourself. And that's up to you.
That's so true. So it's thinking about, you know, the mindset shift that you did when you were undergoing cancer treatment. And it feels to me that you were maybe doing that a bit intuitively, of thinking what would help me in this situation. But I know that then you chose to go deeper into neuroscience and study that. And I also know that the work that you do nowadays is helping people frame challenges and adversity into opportunities. So could you tell me a bit more about how you got interested in neuroscience and how that has led to what you do now?
Yeah, sure. So you're right. In 91, intuitively, that whole experience was an opportunity to invite me to pay more attention to my body, right? And so before that, I used to ignore it, and I still did a terrible job of it up until last year, right? But my body was telling me straight away whether something felt right or not, right? Even the way I think, the thoughts are energy, and they have an impact on the body. The body tells you when something feels good and when something doesn't feel good. And the thing that I learned that is, if something doesn't feel right coming from the body, it's because it's not right. Don't argue. Every time you override it, you're going to pay for it, right? And I was working back in 2008, I was working for a big corporate organisation, and I was the head of learning and development. And we were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on big training programs. And people would come back to work and do what they did before. And I was coaching leaders, executives, you know, and they were paying me a lot of money. And they were resisting change. And I'm like, why are they doing that? So this field of neuroscience started coming up. And I thought, maybe if I can understand the brain more, because I love the brain, I love science, I love maths, and I'm very analytical. So if I can understand something, then I can use it, yeah? So I thought maybe I'll go and study. So I started with the certificate program, and then I did the advanced diploma, and then I decided to do master's study, because the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn, because it taught me so much about how the brain works, how to work with it, not against it. And if you can align your thoughts, your words, your actions, then you can have a really good life, you know, and you can heal. And I realized, wow, how did I know? I just intuitively knew how to do that. Now I could understand the science. So when I'm working with people, I can talk not only from direct experience because I've lived through those experiences, but I can also explain the science that underpins those strategies or those options to take charge of your life or to shift the focus of your attention.
That's really, that's really good. And I think that's also something that we need to pay more attention to and to learn in our own lives. So always thinking, to me, a big revelation was understanding that I am not my thoughts, and my thoughts are my thoughts, but I am not that. And that's just been such a massive shift where now I have a thought and I go, ooh, that's maybe not the most productive thought, but then I don't think I am that. I just think, okay, that's a thought. And it takes a lot of the power, I would say, away from that thought. But it's all those tools, and so often I'm wondering, we go through school and we learn geography, we learn history, we learn math, and they're all useful. I'm not saying they're not, but my bone to pick is we don't learn these tools. We don't learn how to self-soothe. We don't learn, how to take care of our mental health. We also don't need finances, but we don't learn finances, but that's not for the topic of today's conversation. So it just feels like something every human should know, that we are not our thoughts, that we can just change the thoughts that we have, and that we don't need to live in that spiral, because the more you look at the world around you through a negative lens, the worse it becomes and the lower you get. So the lower it becomes in response to your thoughts. It's really fascinating.
Here's the thing. If we were taught this at a younger age, a lot of industries would not be very profitable, okay? So best I not say much more than that. The thing that there are enough people now, enough of us waking up and realizing that we are a lot more powerful, and that thoughts are very powerful, and that we have choice about the thoughts we choose to follow and the thoughts we don't need to follow. So it's important to realize that once you take responsibility for your life, that means deciding which thoughts are going to help you, not hurt you, and then align your words and your actions accordingly. That's the recipe for a healthy, happy life.
Absolutely. So how can people connect with you and with your work?
Well, the best way, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, josiethomson.com, no P. I'm also on, I've got my website, josiethomson.com, and I'll be starting some online programs very soon so that people can have more access to me directly rather than just on pre-recorded courses and things like that.
Oh, that's really cool. What are the programs about?
Well, they'll be about taking charge of your life. Yeah, so I'm creating those at the moment, and I'm in the middle of publishing 4 new books which are on similar themes. So watch this space.